Greetings. In this video, I'd like to spend a little bit of time talking about medicine, law, and social control. And one of the interesting features here is, again, the changes over time in medicine's role in influencing the behaviors in society and also the legal system. And historically, we can look at the ways that madness was treated in ancient times in Greece and Rome in the Middle Ages, the Renaissance, 1600, 1900, 19th century US. And then really, I could start around the 1950s where some medications were discovered accidentally to have psychotherapeutic effects. For example, they found that certain medications seemed to decrease the symptoms of schizophrenia and manic depression and other mental disorders. And we saw that, pharmacology revolution, if you will, and it's gone through several psychiatric revolutions, since that time period. And along with the 20th century psychiatric revolutions, really, we've seen psychoanalysis as well, the community mental health centers, partial hospitalization programs, which are popular in the 80s, then, of course, new psychoactive drugs, then the managed care system, and then even newer psychoactive drugs. And we see that that the pharmaceutical companies try to produce medications that target specific areas of the brain and perhaps to decrease specific symptoms. But how do we know what's considered mental illness and what is not? At least in the United States, we rely on the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, which is published by the American Psychiatric Association. This is what I'm going to show you right now is extremely exciting, so brace yourself. DSM-2. This is the second edition. The first edition I have as a PDF file. I don't have the original. Now, the next set of books are actually the pocket versions. The actual DSM is much, much larger and heavier and longer. But look at this, DSM-3. This is what I was trained with, believe it or not. Here it has my name, Rollins College, 1984. Wow. The DSMs make me feel very, very old, but this is what I was trained on. But since then, we had the diagnostic and the DSM-3R, the DSM-4, the DSM-4 TR or text revision, spiral bound, and currently in 2016 we use the DSM-5, which actually came out in May in 2013. So there's my DSM collection. I actually had several of the larger ones. I have a few in my bookshelf. The others I put in my garage, and bugs got into it and ate them, and they got kind of gross, so I threw them out. But and of course now we use DSM apps and we use online DSM, so we don't have to carry around all these books. But that's basically the way in the United States that we decide what is a mental disorder and what is not. Is it a deviation from the normal? Who develops the idea? What group? Well, there's working groups that develop what's considered a mental disorder and what's not. And so there's a lot of debate on certain situations. For example, is caffeine dependence a mental disorder? Nicotine dependence, gambling, sex addiction, child abuse, and so on. And so it's interesting that that there are actually changes from the DSM-4 TR and then the DSM-5. For example, they removed the diagnostic system based on 5 axes, which is unfortunate in my opinion, since we just published a book explaining how to use that Now they don't use it anymore. So there, you can imagine all the people who had to revise their PowerPoint slides and lectures. So I have to take lots of material out or change it around because of the new DSM. What's interesting, though, is that we've seen a increase in diagnostic categories or specific mental disorders over time. The first DSM had 106. The second one, 182. The third one, 265. The revised third one, 292. And four and on over 300. So we see that. Kirk and Cutchins believes that a lot of this is related to regulating the flow of clients, protecting clients from harm, also obtaining financial backing and resources, rationalizing decision making, and also advancing political agendas. So there's a whole nature of social control and politics associated with determining what is considered a mental disorder and what is not. And what we're seeing now, even though these are all based on whether symptoms are present or not, and the length of symptoms and whether they're disruptive, we're also beginning to see now a whole revolution of brain scanning and a lot more debate there, not only as it relates to mental disorders, but also as it relates to whether or not someone has some type of brain dysfunction that might be responsible for their behavior. And that gets us into the whole area. Is everything really just neural activity? How do we understand, evaluate it? How do we change it? Should we change it? What are the ethics related to changing it? And what laws relate to all that? And how does that change our ideas about free will? In other words, what people have control over or not in terms of what they do. Interesting, when we start looking at more recently, we've seen a lot of brain scanning going on, and then you get these pictures, and an expert says, look, this person's more violent because they have less activity here and more activity there. But the interesting feature is that's pointed out by several is that usually people don't get their brain scan when they're committing a crime. So we don't know what the brain looks like during the commission of a crime. So that's a big problem there. Also, we see brain scanning being discussed as a new lie detection test, and there's a lot of problems with that as well. And Shermer points out in a 2008 in a Scientific American Mind article why you should be skeptical of brain scans, that it's an unnatural environment for cognition. It's an actual indirect measure of the brain activity. And also that the colors exaggerate the effects in the brain. The images are also, put together from statistical analysis of many scans, and that finally brains may activate for a variety of different reasons. But yet I have some photos there of different brain scanning and different ideas, and even a statement from the National Institute of Mental Health site trying to associate certain parts of a scan with certain types of mental disorders. And Goodenough and Tucker in their 2010 article, Law and Cognitive Neuroscience, from the Annual Review of Law and Social Science, talks about the need and the importance of merging this whole idea of brain scanning with bioethics, and also to take heed and be cautious and think about, neurodazzle, multiple factors, and stigmatization. That neurodazzle is kind of like in the courtroom, the medical professionals standing up there with all these charts with all these brain scans and different colors and pointing out this means this means that, this means this. I mean, if you don't know anything about neurology or neuroscience, and most people don't, it's easy to believe that that everything is very accurate and not to evaluate the limitations and other problems. And of course, the stigmatization, that someone's brain scanned, then do they have problems getting insurance? Are they labeled in a negative way? Would it be used as a screening tool for certain jobs? And other areas that may be a focus, would it be used as a lie detection test, whether or not someone's actually experiencing pain, as a mental illness diagnostic tool, or in regards to memory reliability test, and again trying to test out how responsible someone would be based on their brain scan. A lot of this goes into the area of medicalization, at how a non-medical problem becomes a medical problem. And we see that a lot in the areas with the paraphilias and sexuality, and also with other behaviors as well. And we've also seen, though, demedicalization as well as remedicalization. So we've seen, and I think the case study of homosexuality, you can read up the history of that situation. And also, you can read about certain mental disorders and the changes there. One big debate that's going on right now is whether there is such thing as sexual addiction, and whether or not, first of all, is there sexual addiction? Is that an actual disorder or an addiction? And secondly, should it be included in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorder? There's a whole bunch of debate. They actually had criteria for it, but it did not make it in the manual. So, and then there were lots of arguments going on, and still continue, on whether or not this is sexual addiction is a real medical disorder or mental disorder, or if it's something that has been created or medicalized by those who'd like to exert social control on defining what would be normal sexual behavior. And there's a whole interesting research and area on that I would mention. Also, the whole idea of dangerousness, and how people should be controlled based on not necessarily if they've already engaged in dangerous behavior, but the risk that they will. So we often see risk assessments being conducted, and trying to determine if a person's at risk to themselves or others, which is extremely difficult to do, to predict dangerousness. Of course, previous behavior is usually used as a predictor in clinical settings, and also some other features as well. But we're always asking about probabilities or likelihoods, and so that leads to a lot of debate as well. And then finally, when we get into the discussion of are there certain, the big question, are certain mental disorders related to criminal behavior? And probably one that we don't have to argue about in the policy making and the clinical settings and the criminal justice research is antisocial personality disorder. Because some of the symptoms basically would be considered to be criminal oriented, and would be related to that those types of situations. So for example, antisocial personality disorder here in the DSM-5. If I could just go over a little bit of that. But the first criteria in diagnosing that is a pervasive pattern of disregard for and violation of the rights of others occurring since age 15, as indicated by 3 or more of the following. And then they have a bunch of characteristics. Failure to conform to social norms with respect to lawful behaviors, for example, deceitfulness, impulsivity, lack of remorse. And so you get into those areas where, that someone who is diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder may or may not engage in law-breaking activity. But you can see that some of the symptoms would indicate a higher risk of engaging in that illegal activity. So there's a lot of debate about antisocial personality disorder, not only diagnosing, but also treatment, and how that should play a role in any court hearing. And there's continued interest in differentiating antisocial personality disorder from psychopathy, or the psychopath which would really be the more criminal-oriented uh, um, label. That there's not a psychopath diagnosis. And antisocial personality disorder is not the same as the psychopathic personality, if you will. The psychopath is much more dangerous and much more likely to be involved in violence and criminal activity than someone with antisocial personality disorder. And in fact, many people that have the characteristics of antisocial personality disorder are not dangerous and don't commit crimes, but do very well in a variety of professions, such as sales. But there's still a lot of debate on what might cause that. Is it socialization? Is it neurological? Is it a combination? And again, the whole idea here, how does the medical institution, if you will, exert social control over social behavior, and how does that relate to the legal system as well? And this wraps up this video.